welcome. Thank you for being here. And thank you, even though I don't think anyone from Southwest College is here, thank you so much to Southwest College for just like immediately making this space available to us. We asked and they were like, yeah, sure. What's ours is yours. So thanks to them. I'm Allegra. I'm an immigration attorney and the director of Santa Fe Dreamers Project. I'm going to let everyone else introduce themselves.
I'm Elaina Vermeulen. I'm the legal fellow for the Santa Fe Dreamers Project.
I'm Emma O'Sullivan, and I'm a staff attorney at the Dreamers Project.
And so I'm not going to actually, for once, do all the talking tonight. And I'm going to let Elaina and Emma do some work and chime in where I'm useful. But I just wanted to introduce you all to a little about where we're coming from in wanting to do this class. And I'm going to then probably let Elaina take it from there. So, does anyone care what I usually do an intro about Santa Fe Dreamers Project. You'll get a sense of what we do there, right? Okay. But one of the things that some people aren't aware of is we have a very intense legal project in the Cibola County Correctional Center in Milan, New Mexico, in Cibola County. And we do a couple of different things there. We work in the transgender pod because it is the only place where transgender women can opt to be detained in a transgender exclusive pod in the United States. There are some other women detained in parts, but this is when a woman says, I want to be detained in a safer place. They're sent to Milan. And it's also where male asylum seekers are sent to be do their asylum interviews. And right now what that has been is a lot of dads who have been separated from their kids. And so we provide representation, pro bono representation, to all the trans women in the facility. And then we provide legal orientation to the fathers who are there for their interviews because they're going to wind up detained in El Paso, so we don't get a chance to represent them. But we do know that this is a great chance to access them and make sure they're getting proper orientation and proper rights. Hi, Isabel. But, welcome back from Columbia. Sorry. But, so the reason this issue of private prisons is really close to our hearts and something that we're really excited about educating you about and hopefully doing something about in New Mexico is we get to see firsthand the level of suffering that happens to people inside of private prisons. And we have a very, very interesting opportunity this coming up in our state is that we have state legislators, who are offering to have a hearing to learn more about our contracts with these private facilities, about the way people are being treated, and to sort of reevaluate, perhaps, our relationship with these companies and the way we're doing oversight and the contracts. This is not something that's happening all over the country. This is something that's happening in California and New Mexico. Do you know of any other states that are doing this? No. Sorry, this is my cheat sheet right here. He knows a lot. So this is actually a super positive thing and a super unique experience for us to get involved in a public issue that really, really matters. And what we want to be sure of is that we use this time to be as on point and focused in our activism and our questioning and our cooperation with our state legislators so that we can move this process forward. What we don't want is people coming in and screaming about children in cages. I mean, all that stuff is super important, but we get 1 hour of public comment during this hearing. And there's going to be a lot, and so we want to make sure you are as educated about what this hearing is and isn't about, and what you need to know, and what we need to find out, so that we can take this opportunity and move it forward. Does that make sense? So I'm going to just start, we're going to be doing some facts, and we're going to try to answer your questions as much as possible. We're also going to pre-ask for your forgiveness. We are not experts on this issue. I am an expert in certain parts of immigration law, and we've all spent an extensive amount of time in these prisons, and we are certainly, our hearts are experts in how much these women and men we meet are suffering. But I'm not an expert, and neither are any of these women, about how state contracts interact. So hopefully when we can answer a question, and for free, if there's people in the audience who know too, I have 2 friends who work in state government, I know here right now. So we just want to figure out what else do we need to know? What questions are out there and stuff like that. So forgive us if we can't be complete experts, but we're hoping that this will help you get some basic facts, will help orient you to the options we have in terms of demands with our legislators, and then also talk a little bit about divestment, which isn't something that we can that we can really talk to our legislators about, although we're not really sure, but it's something that we can talk about in our personal lives and perhaps our municipality and the institutions we're involved with as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Elaina. I'm going to try not to interrupt you too much to be actually.
But
there you go.
So, the objectives for tonight, we wanted to be really clear because I think when we talk about immigration, and especially when we talk about immigration detention, the ideal on a broad scale and a long-term scale would be that we just end immigration detention. But unfortunately, we're going to be really pragmatic and just talk about it within the realm of what we can do during the hearing on June 16th, and then also what we can do in response to private prison companies and their presence in New Mexico. So the first objective is to provide you with a broad understanding of private prisons, how they function, who the actors are, also immigration detention in New Mexico, what that looks like, who the companies are, how many immigrants they have in detention, and how long their contracts are signed for presently, and then also prepare us all for the hearing on July 16th. Because I think, as Allegra had stated, the concern is that we're going to come in with a lot of broad concerns, and I think that's valid. I think there's a lot of outrage, but I think it's also important that we channel that productively, and then also that we're ceding that space and that time during the public hearing for immigrants to speak to their experiences and their concerns around private prisons and their role in New Mexico. So an introduction to the topic, private prisons are prison companies that are run for profit. We have several major private prison companies that operate nationally as well as internationally. Do you want to pull up?
I'll get yours.
Yeah. Okay. So the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or BOP as I'll refer to them in the future, began signing federal contracts with private prison companies in 1997. ICE was established in 2003, and due to a lack of facilities, overcrowding facilities, and just not having the capacity for that, we began signing contracts with private prisons. In 2016, the Department of Justice under the Obama administration signed a memorandum that we were no longer going to be contracting with private prison facilities. When the
Department of Justice.
The Department of Justice,
Right.
yeah. When Donald Trump was elected, private prison companies stock soared, or Civic, which is one of the major companies, stock prices rose by 43% on November 9th, and the Geo groups rose by 21%. Right now, currently 73% of detained immigrants, of which there are approximately 40,000, and we're looking to expand to 51,000 in the United States presently, are detained in privately run prisons. So the immigration prisons that we have currently active right now, yeah.
Could you repeat some of those numbers for me?
Yeah.
I can write them down
Okay,
while
great.
Elaina talks.
Yeah. Okay, so 73% of detained immigrants in the United States are detained in private prisons as of 2016.
Let me just get it.
And that's 72% of the 40,000 detained immigrants in the United States. In a gross approximation. Yeah.
It's just since 2016.
2016, yeah.
40K
73%.
detained. 73% in private prison. But you should know, in New Mexico, it's 100%. Our only immigration prisons in New Mexico are private prisons. So, this is the national standard. We're higher.
In 2015, 90% of the 10 largest facilities that detained immigrants were run by private prison companies. So 9 out of 10 of the largest immigration detention centers were run by private prison companies.
So in New Mexico, it's 100%.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get to New Mexico, but yeah. Our figures are a lot more staggering than the national ones. So.
Yeah. Are there any other specific statistics that you wanted repeated?
That's a lot.
Yeah, Miguel.
And it's all Geo and Core Civic, that's, or are there others?
Okay, so in New Mexico specifically, Cibola County Correctional Center is run by Core Civic. That's one of the major players. The other massive major player in the United States is the Geo Group. Otero is another immigration prison in New Mexico, and that's run by Management Training Corporation. So the major players are Core Civic, the Geo Group, and Management and Training Company, which goes by MTC.
It's important to know when you're reading about the history of this, Core Civic used to be CCA, the Correctional Corporation of America. They rebranded.
Yeah.
And is this a true thing, is like an MBM is running like a child black site in Phoenix, is that like a real story?
Yeah, let's get to that. Let's stay on a little bit on track and then save that question for the end, because it's important. Maybe we should save questions, let Elaine, and then just remember your questions, because they're all important.
Okay. Great. So yeah, Otero, as I mentioned, is in Chaparral, New Mexico, and that is run by MTC. Cibola County is run by Core Civic. Each of them have incredibly lucrative contracts. The Cibola contract, from publicly available data, doesn't have a stipulated end to the contract. Otero's is going to be contracted until February 2019 through MTC. We can talk a little bit about the numbers of individuals detained in Otero and Cibola. You want me to speak to the number of people in Otero?
Do I have a number? I have a Cibola number.
Okay.
It's somewhere in the 700 to 800s, is what I believe. And so Otero County Correctional Center, which is in Chaparral, New Mexico, which is right outside of El Paso and is a holding place for the notorious El Paso immigration courts. It's about 800 people, and I believe it's adult men and women, obviously detained separately, but it's for adult men, like cis men and cis women. And Cibola, which holds adult men and transgender women, has a capacity of 800, I think. I don't know, they can't give us accurate numbers of how many ICE detainees are actually there right now because it's a mixed population. Cibola County also contracts the facility for local, if you get a DUI, that kind of thing, and also with federal marshal stuff. And so it's a mixed population, but they currently have 3 units holding immigrants. And my guess, it's so hard to tell. There's 60 trans women detained there, and I would guess maybe 300 or 400 males at this point. They're moving pretty fast through there, but that would be my guess. No. Oh yeah. Some art therapy going on here. There we go.
Okay. So I'm going to talk some numbers. Tell me to slow down at any point. Geo Group and Core Civic, which are the 2 largest national private prison companies, their annual revenue in 2017 was $4 billion. That's a staggering number. The cost of taxpayers alone in the past year was $2 billion. So all of this is being publicly funded by taxpayers. Between 2004 and 2017, Geo Group spent $6.3 million in lobbying. Some of the things that goes towards, some of the lobbying money what that goes towards is, for example, the Private Prison Info Act of 2007, I believe. And that, what they asked for, essentially, through that piece of legislation, was that any of the information that could be accessed, usually through publicly run prisons, via the Freedom of Information Act, the same thing would apply to privately run prisons. Because right now, as it exists, because the lobbying was incredibly successful in defeating this act, any kind of information about privately run prisons does not need to be made publicly available through FOIA, through the Freedom of Information Act. The only way of accessing financial information about them is through an SEC filing. So right now we've been trying to dig up information on their contracts, and it's not publicly available. Between 1998 and 2017, CoreCivic spent $24 million on lobbying. We'll cycle back to that in our demands of our politicians at the Roundhouse meeting on in July 16th. Yeah.
These are nationwide or statewide?
Nationwide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the 6.3 million applies to Washington or also to the capitals in every state?
I'm sorry?
It applies to Washington D.C., but also the money that's going into, or until very recently, was going into the pockets of our senators and our state lawmakers and stuff like that. So this is all that they spent in lobbying, not just in D.C., but also in terms of increasing contracts and stuff at the local level.
We'll come to that later. Okay, so I think the question that arises is why are we signing contracts with private prison companies? One of the reasons that they have used traditionally in the past to justify it is that there's overcrowding in city, county, or state jails. They don't have adequate facility space. They don't have the trained personnel in order to do that. Another reason that they said was for cost benefits. So there are things called lockup quotas, also known as bed quotas, that private prisons utilize. So a lockup quota is particularly odious. What it is essentially within contracts, private prison companies embed quotas stipulating that a certain percentage of beds have to be filled every single night, or we have to pay a certain amount that's significantly more than the per diem cost of hosting an individual in that space. Usually the per diem, the lockup quotas are about 90%, some of them are 100%. So for example, in Seville County, if we only have 300 detained immigrants there, and the capacity is for 800, we would be paying for every single bed that doesn't meet that 90%.
And it's actually a fine.
Yeah.
So what it is seen as is a breach of contract that we don't have our bed quota filled. So we end up paying more per bed than we would if there was an inmate in it, which means we are publicly incentivized to keep those beds filled to keep costs lower. And this is not just in immigrant prisons, it's also in private prisons that hold people who are criminally charged.
And what it does also is it protects private prison companies. For example, if they breach a contract, if there's been some kind of investigation that provided insights into conditions within the prisons that are being run, it protects them financially from suffering any of the consequences or blowbacks of those missteps, if that makes sense. And it protects their profits significantly, all at cost to taxpayers. So ultimately, in a lot of the investigations that they do into private prisons, they find that they're not actually more cost effective. Although there are always independent studies that say it saves approximately 10 to 15% in comparison to city, county, or state jails. Yeah. Another...
Elaina, can I add something?
Yeah.
I knew I said I was going to do this,
Yeah.
but I just get so excited. But that is, the savings is if you're insisting on locking people up, right? There are alternatives to detention. So like the savings only happen if you're like, we're going to detain these 300 people, and this is going to cost us less to detain them than if we did it in a public facility. But what that presumes is that we have to be detaining those people at all, right? And so when you're looking at those numbers and saying, this is actually saving the taxpayer, be careful to say, like, do we need this at all? I'm not going to start ranting and raving about criminal detention, but I will say this is civil detention. There are alternatives to detention. So when someone says, like, but it saves us money to use private, or, like, or we just don't use that, like, or just don't lock anyone up in civil facilities. We have amazingly cost-effective alternatives to detention for immigrants.
Yeah.
What kind of defense mechanism is holding, like sexual and
We're gonna get into that.
We'll talk
Yeah.
about that, yeah. That's when I'll probably start screaming and lose my voice. It's already starting to happen.
Go stick my head under
Yeah.
the waterfall for a while.
That's dripping wet. Okay. Monopolies also. So there's very little competition. I named 3 companies that have monopolies within private prison competition. So, I mean, Core Civic Geo Group and MTC. They're technically competing with one another, but now there's such a demand that they can include things like lockup quotas within their contracts. There's another instance, for example, in Texas where they did an investigation, figured out that they were in gross breach of their contract in terms of care and medical negligence for their detained populations. And ultimately what happened during the contract negotiations was that the individuals working for the Bureau of Prisons realized that they didn't really have any alternatives, so they re-signed their contract for the following year because they just didn't have alternatives that were plausible nor feasible. So when you have a monopoly, there are very few options, and then it also disincentivizes them improving conditions because it's going to be the same across the board.
And also with the monopoly thing, these are contracts, this is how it interestingly happened in New Mexico, is that this wasn't a contract that had to have an open bid for it. Now I'm wading into water that, like, I'm using words I've never used before when talking about this. But essentially the way I understand it, because I read one article about it, is that they used sort of the county as like a dummy almost. So when Rosa can correct me if I'm wrong about this. When 2 government agencies make a contract together or for like a job, they don't have to open it up for bidding. So like all these places can compete. And so they did it between ICE and Cibola County, but really Core Civic was there the whole time. So they were able to give the contract to Core Civic without having a bidding process that would cause these places to compete and say, we actually take care of our inmates. We do it really cost effectively, stuff like that. And so it eliminates the need for like better services because Core Civic, through whatever way this happened, whether it was through their lobbying efforts, had already secured the contract and there was no way to bid for it. Did I get that right?
So I'm not a procurement expert, I just work for the state government, but sometimes you're allowed to contract with other governmental entities without going through an RFP process.
That's what it was.
So I work for the State Department of Transportation, the optional contract with like the UNM, and that's something where, we're allowed to, we can get a quote from them, discuss it, kind of go through it that way. But the thing that's confusing about this to me would be that Cibola County, when they're contracting with Core Civic, I don't know how that wouldn't have to go through an RFP process. Again, the procurement code is huge. I'm not an expert.
This is what we want clarified for us. How in the heck does a private corporation get a contract like this with our state government without an RFP process?
So
Certainly surprising.
one point there is CCA actually owns the facility in Milan. And so it's not, the county doesn't own the facility and then contract out for the services. CCA owns the facility itself. So the intergovernmental agreement between BOP, really the Marshal Service, the Marshal contracts with the county to say, we'll hold federal prisoners here, whether it's somebody awaiting trial on a murder charge or an immigration detainee, and then the county, who has the authority to say, has the authority to say, well, we are the local authority for where somebody can be behind bars in our jurisdiction, then contracts with CCA, who owns the facility, to be the actual place that those people go.
So then when they establish the ICE detainee contract, it can happen between ICE and Cibola County without...
Right.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. But it does create, no reason for
I think
competition.
the point remains.
Yeah, the point remains the same. The mechanism is a little hard to understand.
And then just to provide another direct comparison between publicly run prisons and privately run prisons, I'm just going to say publicly run prisons as like an umbrella for city, county, and state prisons. Private prisons are as I mentioned before, subject to oversight nor public disclosure. Again, like the Freedom of Information Act does not obligate private prisons to report any kind of information about any of the abuses, any of the conditions, anything related to any of the inner workings within private prisons. So as I was doing research about this, I could hardly find information about any of the operations, management, anything, like any of the nuances of private prison companies and the way that they operate their facilities. Yes.
So does that mean that the media can't access this information either? It's like totally shut down, there's no freedom of
They
information
have
about
almost complete jurisdiction over what information they're making publicly available. Some financial information, like issues related around contracts, can be accessed, but through SEC filings. But again, that's a long and involved process. Yeah.
Can you clarify what the act is, or why is it that those contracts aren't subject to Freedom of Information Act requests?
So because of the successful lobbying against the
Sure.
Private Prison Info Act of 2007, they are not under any, there's no legal requirement that they make that information publicly available to us. Yeah.
Was that authorized by Congress or the president?
The Private Prison Information, I don't know.
The Congress
Yeah.
and then the president signs the law, the vetoes and stuff.
So Obama signed that.
It was not
signed into law.
It's
It
the law
wasn't
failed.
signed into law, it failed, yeah.
It failed.
They effectively defeated it, yeah.
Because the act would have made the private prisons, compelled to share information. But the lobbying killed the act, so they were still, it was going to make them share their information. So when the act got killed, they don't have to anymore.
Is there a reason why they weren't required to share that information by default? Or why would there need to be an act to require them?
It's a private corporation.
Yeah.
It's a private corporation that you can't FOIA. You can't send a public request, a FOIA information, a Freedom of Information Act request to find out information about my business that's not public. There's certain aspects of my business that are public, and certain aspects of businesses you can get information for, like through the SEC and stuff. But normally a corporation you just can't get complete access to their records through FOIA.
Even if they have like specific contracts with.
I mean, that would have been the intent of the law, I assume, is distinguishing this corporation because they are acting in a public function as needing to be subject to better information rules, but that's what the lobbying was about.
So in general, companies in America, not just private prisons, can form whatever kinds of contracts, relationships with the local government. We don't find out about that until.
I don't know.
Well, so any governmental contract that you have, the holding of it, like physically by the government, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requests, generally speaking. So I agree with you that it seems strange that, and I mean maybe it's just a decision
The
between sort of
facts,
the general
right?
records and
The
specific
facts of the
contract.
contract, this is where we might have to apologize if we didn't get this right.
That's
The
okay.
facts of the contract might be of publicly available information. If someone, for example, if someone dies in a public prison, let's say, and their family wants to find out about it, they do a FOIA request, because they're publicly held. FOIA isn't always incredibly effective, but the information about abuse and the way things happen is not publicly discoverable information, which is why lawsuits are so important because when you initiate a lawsuit against these organizations, then or these corporations, then all of a sudden there's all this, through discovery, they're going to have to produce information, which is why they're so averse to being sued, which you think they behave better if they didn't want to be sued. But anyway, I think we're a little, let's just try and hold questions because I want to get through this all and then have a big question and answer thing. Yeah.
So just to wrap up the direct comparisons between public and private prisons, one of the bodies that can investigate and has been investigating and providing oversight for private prisons is the Office of the Inspector General. And in 2016, they did a data analysis of 14 different privately run prisons. And what they said was that in most key areas, contract or private prisons incurred more safety and security incidents per capita than comparable public institutions. They also found that there's insufficient oversight, monitoring, and evaluation in private prisons. So I think that that speaks for itself. What's being done in response to that? Very little.